What if I told you that your greatest obstacle in life is not out there? Not your job, not your past, not even the people who hurt you. It is your own mind. Right now, you are carrying thoughts that are not even yours, fears that were planted years ago, and beliefs that silently whisper you are not good enough. But here is the truth. Your mind can be trained, just like a muscle, just like a skill, just like a warrior. In this series, we're going to show you how to transform the way you think, feel, and face life. Not with motivation that fades, but with wisdom that lasts. If you have ever felt stuck, overwhelmed, or like you are not living the life you were meant to, this is your moment to break free. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and walk with us through the journey of training an unshakable mind. Because once you master your mind, nothing can ever hold you back again. You know that feeling, that quiet ache inside your chest. Not loud, not dramatic, just there, lingering like a shadow. You smile at the world, you keep going. You do what you are supposed to do, but deep down, something feels missing. Like you're standing on the edge of your own life, watching it happen from a distance. Maybe you've had moments where everything around you looks fine, but inside you're drowning. The laughter feels forced. The days blur together. You lie in bed at night staring at the ceiling, and you whisper silently, "Is this it? Is this all there is?" And then one day, it hits you. Maybe in the middle of a crowded room, or alone in your car at a red light, or while brushing your teeth. A wave of realization. This life you are living is not the one your soul came here for. That moment, that crack in the routine, that sacred discomfort. That is where everything begins, not with a plan, not with motivation, but with truth. Raw, unfiltered, undeniable. Evelyn was standing in line at a grocery store in downtown Chicago. It was a Tuesday, raining. She was holding a basket of kale and almond milk, thinking about her next Zoom meeting. When it hit her, a sudden stillness. Like the world froze for just a second, and she heard a voice inside, not dramatic, not mystical, just honest. "I am not okay." That one thought changed her life. Not because she had a solution, but because for the first time in years, she stopped lying to herself, and that is where your story begins too. Right here, in the quiet honesty between breaths, in the moment when you no longer pretend, in the moment when you say, "I want more, I need more, I deserve more, not more things, not more success, but more truth, more peace, more clarity, more life." We all reach this moment differently. Sometimes it's triggered by loss, a breakup, a failure, a betrayal. Other times, nothing major happens, just an inner shift, a silent breaking point. But when it comes, you will feel it not as a scream, but as a whisper. You were not born to just survive. You were meant to awaken. And that awakening does not come from the outside. Not from the world finally loving you. Not from fixing every problem. It comes from turning inward, from facing the noise inside, from being willing to feel all of it, the pain, the fear, the numbness, the longing, because within that raw space, a seed is planted, the seed of change, of strength, of a new life waiting to be born. So if you are here, if you are still listening, if your chest is aching a little right now, not from sadness, but from resonance, know this: you are not alone. And this is your moment, the moment that changes everything. Evelyn didn't cry that day in the grocery store. She didn't scream or run away or dramatically quit her job like some movie scene. She just stood there, holding a basket, staring at the checkout counter, and feeling something shift inside her that she couldn't explain. For years, she had been holding everything together: meetings, deadlines, family obligations, social expectations, all the roles she was supposed to play. And she had done it well. People admired her. Her resume was solid. Her life on the surface looked enviable. But inside, she was crumbling quietly, piece by piece, beneath a mask of composure. That moment in the store wasn't a breakdown, it was an awakening. A moment of seeing clearly, even for just a second. She wasn't falling apart, she was waking up to how far she had drifted from herself. And maybe, as you listen now, you know that feeling too. That subtle, haunting realization that something inside has been sleeping for too long. That the life you're living doesn't feel like yours. That you're constantly waiting for some invisible permission to begin again. We are taught to ignore that voice. To be practical, to be grateful, to push through. But there is a cost to pushing through for too long. You lose your joy, you lose your spark, and eventually you lose yourself. Evelyn realized she didn't need another promotion or a new apartment or a better partner. What she needed was something deeper. She needed to find her center again, her real voice. The part of her that had been drowned out by noise, performance, and survival. She didn't know what to do next. She didn't have a 10-step plan or a coach or a spiritual guide. But she made one quiet promise to herself that day. I will no longer betray my own soul just to keep the world comfortable. That was it. That was the first step. And often that is how it begins, not with clarity but with courage. The courage to feel again. The courage to admit you're not where you want to be. The courage to sit with the silence long enough to hear something real rise from within. She went home that evening and turned off her phone. No emails, no scrolling, just silence. The kind that makes you feel uncomfortable at first. The kind that makes you want to get up and do something, anything. But she stayed with it. She sat by the window and watched the rain tap against the glass. For the first time in a long time, she didn't distract herself. She didn't numb. She didn't pretend to be okay. She just was. And in that stillness, something else emerged. A kind of sadness she had never fully let herself feel. A grief for the years she had lived half alive. For the love she gave to those who couldn't hold it. For the parts of herself she abandoned to fit in. She cried, not out of weakness, but out of relief. It was the kind of cry that cleanses. That empties. That clears space for something new. Maybe you've never had that moment, or maybe it's happening now. Maybe something inside you is beginning to stir. If so, don't run from it. That quiet ache you feel, it's not brokenness. It's your soul trying to speak. And when you finally start to listen, everything begins to change. The journey of training your mind doesn't start with big ideas. It starts with honesty, with asking, what do I really want? And what is no longer working? It begins when you stop chasing a life that looks good and start building one that feels true. And it begins in the smallest of moments, like standing in a grocery store, holding kale, and realizing you can't keep lying to yourself. That's the moment, that's the threshold. And it's not dramatic, it's quiet, sacred, life-changing. Evelyn didn't change overnight, but she changed direction. And sometimes all it takes is turning 1 degree to eventually arrive somewhere entirely new. This part of the story, this beginning, is not about fixing yourself. It's about meeting yourself, maybe for the first time in years. And from there, real transformation becomes possible. Because once you can finally say, this isn't who I am anymore, you give yourself permission to become someone new. Not someone better in the eyes of others, but someone whole in the eyes of your own soul. Evelyn began to notice small things in the days that followed, things she hadn't paid attention to in years. The way the morning light spilled onto her kitchen counter. The sound of birds outside her window that she'd long tuned out. The moment her feet touched the floor when she got out of bed. These weren't just details. They were anchors, reminders that life wasn't only happening on a screen or inside her calendar. It was right here in the present moment, breathing with her, waiting for her to notice. The first shift she made wasn't external, it was how she spoke to herself. For most of her adult life, her inner voice was harsh, critical, and impatient. Why can't you focus? You're falling behind, don't be so sensitive. But now, when that voice rose, she began to pause, to question it. To gently respond, that's not true. It felt awkward at first, like speaking a language she hadn't practiced in years. But something softened. There was a kindness returning, not from the world, from within. She started journaling each night just for 10 minutes. Not for productivity or planning, but for truth. At first, the pages came slowly. But after a week, the ink flowed like a dam had burst. Memories, regrets, longings all poured out. One entry simply read, I miss myself. That line stayed with her. She didn't need a new life. She needed to return to herself. And in that process, she realized something powerful. She had been surviving, not living. Doing everything she was supposed to do, but never checking in with her soul. She remembered the younger version of herself, curious, creative, daring. She used to paint. She used to write poems no one saw. She used to dance alone in her apartment with the music up loud. When did all of that get buried? And more importantly, was it too late to bring it back? That question didn't come with an immediate answer. But it did come with a quiet commitment. Each morning, she would reclaim one small part of herself. One morning, she painted for 15 minutes before work. Another, she played a song she hadn't heard since college and danced barefoot on the kitchen floor. And on one particularly brave afternoon, she pulled out a notebook and began writing a letter to herself. Not to her future self, not to her past, but to the version of her that was still waiting, quietly, to be remembered. The letter began with, "I'm sorry I left you behind. I'm here now, and I promise to listen." These weren't grand gestures. They were small, sacred acts, the kind that often go unnoticed but make all the difference. That's how change really begins, not with lightning but with a spark, not with a leap but a single step taken in a new direction. Evelyn didn't share any of this with her friends at first. They were still caught in the same cycle she had lived in for years. Busy, burned out, distracted. She didn't want to explain herself. This was too personal, too fragile. But slowly, as she changed, they noticed. One friend asked if she was seeing someone new. Another asked what app she was using to sleep better. Evelyn just smiled and said, "I'm doing less, but I feel more alive." The truth is, people often expect transformation to be loud, to come with big announcements and dramatic exits. But real transformation? It's quiet, it's private. It happens in the space between your thoughts, in the breath you take before reacting, in the moment you choose to respond with love instead of fear. It happens when you stop abandoning yourself for the sake of being liked, approved, or accepted. And here's something Evelyn learned the hard way. The world doesn't celebrate your inner breakthroughs. There's no applause when you say no to what no longer serves you. No trophies for choosing healing over hustle. But the reward is something deeper. You begin to trust yourself again. You begin to come home. One afternoon, she sat on a park bench and watched the wind rustle the leaves above her. The light was soft, the world unusually still, and she thought to herself, "I feel at peace." Not the fleeting kind of peace that comes from distraction or comfort, but the kind that arrives when nothing is missing, when you're not trying to be anywhere else, when you are finally fully present with yourself. This was her beginning. And maybe as you hear this, it can be yours too, not by copying what she did, not by trying to force something that isn't ready, but by noticing the moment, this moment, and asking, what is my soul whispering to me now? Because underneath the noise, the pressure, the story you've been living, there is a voice. Quiet but constant. It's not asking you to change everything. It's just asking you to come closer, to listen, to trust. And once you begin to hear it, everything changes. Pretending. Each time she slowed down, each time she stopped trying to outrun her own discomfort, she discovered a stillness beneath the surface. Not empty, not lifeless, but rich, quiet, wise. One weekend, she drove north along the lake, far from the city. No plan, no destination. Just a desire to breathe somewhere her soul didn't feel caged. She pulled off the road near a trail she used to hike as a teenager. It had been years. The trailhead was the same, but the path looked different, overgrown, quieter, a little wild. She smiled. It felt symbolic. She walked in silence, the crunch of gravel underfoot, the wind soft through the trees. With each step, her mind loosened its grip. Thoughts came, but they no longer swirled. Memories arose, but she let them pass like clouds. She reached a clearing overlooking the water. There was a flat rock, sun-warmed and waiting. She sat, pulled her knees to her chest, and let the moment hold her. Tears came again, this time not from grief, but from gratitude. Gratitude for the stillness, for her own courage to be here, for the quiet knowing that no matter how lost she had felt, she was never truly alone. Something had always been guiding her back. Maybe you felt that too, that subtle nudge. That gut feeling, that ache in your chest you can't explain. We spend so much of our lives trying to meet expectations. Family, society, social media, old promises to ourselves. But sometimes the most radical act of strength is to stop, to look around, and to ask, whose life am I living? Who would I be if I weren't afraid? We often wait for permission, for signs, for someone else to go first. But this moment right here, that ache in your heart, that quiet stirring inside, is your permission. You don't need to be ready. You don't need to have it all figured out. You just need to be honest. Honesty is how the mind begins to untangle. It's how you drop the mask. It's how you remember you were never supposed to feel this numb, this rushed, this small. You were born for depth, for connection, for a life that doesn't just impress others but nourishes you. Evelyn didn't know what her future would look like, But she started living differently. She said no more often, not rudely, not defiantly, just clearly. She stopped apologizing for needing rest. She stopped proving her worth through productivity. She started seeking moments that made her feel alive, whether anyone noticed or not, and that began to change everything. One night she lit a candle and sat in her living room, the lights off, the city quiet behind her windows. She whispered to herself, "I forgive you." She didn't know who it was for exactly, maybe the younger version of herself who stayed too long in places that hurt. Maybe the version that silenced her truth to avoid conflict. Maybe the one that kept chasing success to outrun emptiness. But that whisper, soft, trembling, real, was enough. Forgiveness is not always about others. Sometimes the deepest work is forgiving the versions of you that didn't know better, that were doing their best to survive. And in that forgiveness, you finally begin to return to yourself, not as a performance, but as a truth. She started reading again, not just business books, but poetry, essays, philosophy, words that fed her rather than pushed her. She found a journal from when she was 17, filled with drawings and handwritten lyrics. She laughed at her old self, then cried. Because she could see it so clearly now, that girl had dreams. She had wonder. And Evelyn had spent years trying to become someone else, only to realize that all she ever wanted was to come back to her. Maybe your version of this story looks different. Maybe you've never journaled or danced barefoot or walked into the woods. That's okay. You don't need a trail in nature to find peace. You just need one moment of stillness. One breath of truth. One whisper inside you saying, "I'm ready to come home." Because the moment you decide to stop living on autopilot, the moment you stop performing a life you don't recognize, that is the moment everything starts to change. Not because the world changes, but because you do. Your eyes soften, your breath slows, your mind becomes a little quieter, and your soul, after years of waiting, starts to rise. That's what this journey is really about, not becoming someone new, but unbecoming everything you were never meant to be. Letting go of the shoulds, the musts, the fake smiles, and returning, slowly, gently, to the truth of who you are. So if your heart feels heavy, if your days feel blurred, if your spirit is whispering, "I don't want to live like this anymore," listen. Not to me, not to anyone else, but to yourself. Because inside of you, beneath the fear, beyond the exhaustion, is something unbreakable. A light that hasn't gone out, a strength that hasn't given up, a voice that still remembers who you are. And when you hear it, when you answer it, when you follow it, that is the moment that changes everything. Most of the time, we don't even realize it's there. We wake up, go through our routines, meet deadlines, fulfill obligations, smile at the right people, and say all the right things. From the outside, we look free, free to choose, free to succeed, free to live. But somewhere deep within, there's a quiet friction, a tension we can't quite name. As if we're walking through life with something holding us back, like invisible wires pulling on our chest, our throat, our mind. That something is not the world. It's the invisible wall we've built around ourselves. We don't build it in one day. It forms slowly over years. Every time we shrink our truth to make others comfortable. Every time we ignore that gut feeling that says this isn't right. Every time we silence ourselves to avoid judgment, shame, or rejection. One brick at a time, we create a prison so subtle that we begin to mistake it for reality. Evelyn never thought of herself as someone who lived in fear. She was educated, articulate, competent. She could speak in boardrooms, handle crises, and plan the future with precision. But after her awakening, something strange began to happen. As she tried to step into her truth, simplifying her life, saying no, choosing peace over pressure, she felt resistance. Not from the world, from within. It was as if her own mind pushed back. "You can't do that. What will people think? You'll fall behind. This is selfish." The voice was relentless. Every time she moved toward freedom, that voice reminded her of the rules she had lived by all her life. Be good, be smart, be perfect. Don't make mistakes. Don't make waves, don't be too much. Where did those rules come from? She traced them back to childhood moments she barely remembered, a teacher who told her she talked too much. A parent who only praised achievement. A friend who laughed when she shared her dreams. Little things, seemingly harmless, but each one planted a seed, a belief, a wall, and here's what most of us never question. Those beliefs don't belong to us. They were given to us by a world that was also wounded, afraid, and trying to keep things safe. But we accepted them, we let them shape us, and over time we forgot that we had a choice. That's what the invisible wall is made of, not facts but beliefs, not truth but conditioning. And because we don't see it, we don't challenge it, we just live inside it. One afternoon, Evelyn sat with a retired neurologist named Dr. Harlan, a quiet man in his 70s with kind eyes, and a mind that saw patterns most people missed. He'd studied the brain for decades, but now spent his time helping people unlearn the patterns that trapped them. He listened as she described the resistance she felt, her longing to live differently, her fear of disappointing others. He nodded, then said something she never forgot. The brain is a storyteller, and if you don't question the story, you will live inside it as if it's the only world that exists. Those words cracked something open. She started to notice the stories she told herself, subtle, unconscious, persistent. I don't want to be a burden. If I rest, I'm lazy. I have to earn love. She had never spoken them out loud, but they were always running in the background like a soundtrack she didn't choose. So she did something simple but radical. She began writing them down. Every time a belief surfaced, she paused and wrote, I believe, and finished the sentence. No filter, no judgment, just honesty. I believe people will leave if I'm too emotional. I believe my worth depends on what I produce. I believe if I fail, I'll lose everything. Then, beside each one, she wrote, Is this true? And that's where the walls began to shake. Because most of those beliefs didn't hold up. They were rooted in fear, not fact, in memory, not reality. And in that moment of questioning, space opened. Space to choose a different story, a different path, a different life. We all live with these invisible scripts. They tell us who to be, how to act, what's possible. But they are not laws, they are not absolute. They are just agreements we made, often when we were too young to know better. But now you know better. That voice in your head, the one that tells you you're not enough, or too much, or too late, it's not you. It's a ghost of the past wearing your voice. And the moment you recognize that, you begin to reclaim your power. This is the beginning of real freedom, not when the world changes, but when you stop believing everything your mind tells you. In the weeks that followed her conversation with Dr. Harlan, Evelyn made a commitment. Not to change her whole life overnight, but to become more aware of the voice inside her head. She didn't try to silence it or argue with it. She simply began to watch it, like someone observing traffic from the sidewalk. And what she saw surprised her. Most of her thoughts weren't original. They were echoes, replays, phrases she had heard over and over again growing up, at school, at work, in relationships. Some of them weren't even in her voice. They were spoken in her mother's tone, or an old professor's sarcasm, or her boss's clipped disappointment. And she realized she had been carrying those voices for so long, she had forgotten they weren't hers. That's the trick about the mind. If you hear something often enough, it becomes familiar. And the brain loves what's familiar, even if it's harmful. So instead of questioning, we adapt. We play small. We strive harder. We twist ourselves into shapes that win approval but lose our joy. Evelyn wasn't angry about this. She didn't blame anyone, but she felt something new rising inside her, a quiet defiance. Not the loud, rebellious kind, but the kind that comes from deep clarity. From knowing you've lived inside a story long enough, and it's time to write a new one. She began a new ritual. Each morning, before opening her emails or checking her calendar, she sat for 5 minutes with one question. What's a belief I'm carrying today that no longer serves me? Some days the answer was subtle. I have to be productive to deserve rest. Other days it was painful. If I show who I really am, no one will stay. She didn't try to fix the beliefs right away. She just held them in her awareness like fragile stones, turning them gently in her hands, examining where they came from, how long she had carried them, and how heavy they had become. And slowly, something began to shift. Instead of reacting from those old beliefs, she began to choose differently. She turned down meetings that drained her. She spoke up when something felt wrong. She allowed herself to be vulnerable with friends, even if it felt uncomfortable. And each time she did, the invisible wall lost a little more power. Here, what she learned, the prison you live in is not made of facts. It's made of conclusions you drew in moments of fear, confusion, or pain. And those conclusions can be changed, not by force, but by awareness, by patience, by self-kindness. One afternoon, Evelyn sat in a cafe across from a new friend named Rachel, someone she had met through a community meditation group. Rachel was warm, grounded, and disarmingly honest. As they talked about their lives, Rachel shared something that stayed with Evelyn for weeks. "I used to think I was afraid of failure," she said. "But the truth is, I was afraid of freedom. Because if I was really free, I wouldn't have any excuses left." Evelyn blinked. That hit her somewhere deep. She had never thought of it that way, but it made perfect sense. Part of her had clung to the invisible wall because it gave her structure. Predictability, safety. Even if it was suffocating, it was familiar. And freedom, even though she craved it, was terrifying, because freedom meant responsibility. It meant making choices not out of fear, but from truth. It meant trusting herself. That was the next wall she had to face, not the wall built by others, but the one she had reinforced herself, out of fear, out of habit, out of the mistaken belief that she wasn't ready. But now she was ready. Not for perfection, but for honesty. She began writing letters to her younger self, not to fix the past, but to release the weight of old moments. One letter was addressed to her teenage self, who felt she had to be the best at everything to be loved. Another to her 20-something self, who stayed in relationships too long because she thought being chosen meant being worthy. Each letter ended the same way: "You were always enough. You just didn't know it yet." And with every letter, another part of the wall crumbled. Because shame is like cement, it hardens us, freezes us, keeps us stuck. But truth is like rain, it softens, it seeps in. It finds the cracks and gently breaks them open. That's how freedom works, not by tearing down everything in a single day, but by choosing again and again to tell yourself the truth. One morning, Evelyn wrote a list titled "Rules I'm No Longer Living By." She included, "I must always be busy to be valuable. My emotions are too much for others. If I say no, people will leave. Rest is lazy. I need to explain myself to be accepted." She folded the paper, placed it in a box, and lit a small candle beside it. A symbolic act, nothing flashy, just a quiet declaration: these are not my truths anymore. And perhaps this is where you are too, a moment of awareness, a crack in the wall, a whisper that says, what if I'm not broken? What if I'm just buried under stories that were never mine? You don't need to tear it all down today. You don't need to escape your life. You just need to begin noticing, listening, questioning. Because the walls that keep you stuck were never built to protect you. They were built to survive a version of the world that no longer exists. And now, you are ready to live not from fear but from freedom. The invisible wall was never real, but your courage to walk through it is. One evening, Evelyn decided to do something she hadn't done in years: sit with her discomfort without trying to escape it. No phone, no distractions, no plan. Just a cup of tea and the quiet hum of her apartment. She had spent most of her adult life avoiding silence because she was afraid of what she might hear. But now she welcomed it. And there, in the stillness, she felt it, the wall. Not physically, but emotionally. The tightness in her chest, the tension in her jaw, the thoughts that started to rise: you should be doing something, you're wasting time, this is ridiculous. She noticed the pressure to get up, clean something, check her email, open a book, anything to not just sit and be. But she stayed, and after a while the discomfort began to soften. The thoughts quieted. And in their place, something gentle rose, a memory. She was 5 years old, dancing in the living room in her pajamas, twirling like the world was hers. Her father was watching from the couch, smiling, clapping. She remembered feeling so free, so full of light. There were no walls back then, just movement, joy, belonging. And then she remembered what came after, the comments from a neighbor, "She's a little wild, isn't she?" The teacher who told her to use her inside voice. The look her mother gave when she spilled juice because she was spinning too fast. Little things, tiny moments, but they mattered, because after them she stopped dancing. She realized that's how the wall had started, not from one big betrayal, but from 1,000 small ones. Not even intentional, just enough to make her believe that being her full self was too much, too messy, too inconvenient. She wiped a tear from her cheek, not from sadness, but from clarity. This was never about breaking down walls with force. It was about remembering who she was before the walls were even built. And maybe that's the path for all of us. Not just tearing away what we don't want, but returning to what was always real. The softness, the wildness, the voice before it was shaped to sound acceptable. The next morning, she wrote 3 words on a sticky note and placed it on her bathroom mirror. Unlearn, remember, return. Unlearn the lies, remember the truth, return to herself. From that day on, she treated her inner work not as a battle, but as a homecoming. When fear rose, she didn't fight it. She got curious. Where did you come from? When resistance showed up, she whispered, "Thank you for trying to protect me, but I don't need you anymore." She learned to befriend the parts of herself she once pushed away, the perfectionist who needed control, the child who wanted attention, the shadow who whispered, "You're not ready." She saw them all, held them, didn't shame them, because every part of her was just trying to stay safe in a world that didn't always feel safe. And now she was creating that safety from within. That shift changed everything. She no longer needed the wall, because she was becoming the home she had always longed for. One weekend, she led a small workshop in a local studio, a circle of women, all different ages and stories. The topic was simple: what are you ready to release? They sat in a circle, candles in the center, soft music in the background, and one by one they spoke their truths. I'm ready to release the guilt of choosing myself. I'm ready to stop proving I'm enough. I'm ready to live without fear of judgment. Evelyn spoke last. Her voice was steady, but her eyes shimmered with emotion. I'm ready to stop hiding behind the version of me I thought the world wanted. I'm ready to be seen, not for being perfect, but for being real. There was silence after she spoke, the kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled, the kind that says, "I feel that too." After the circle ended, a woman approached her quietly and said, "You helped me realize I've been living in a cage with the door wide open." Evelyn smiled, because she knew that feeling all too well. That's the thing about these walls. They're rarely locked. We just forget we're allowed to leave. We forget we have the key. But the key isn't something outside of us. It's the moment we start asking better questions, the moment we say, maybe this belief isn't true anymore. The moment we choose curiosity over compliance, truth over approval, freedom over fear. And so now, as you hear these words, maybe ask yourself, what is the belief I've accepted as fact? Who told me I wasn't enough, and why did I believe them? What if the story I've been living isn't the story I want to keep telling? What if the wall I keep bumping into isn't real? Your mind, powerful as it is not your enemy. It's a storyteller, and you are its author. Every day, with every thought, every action, every pause, you are writing a narrative. So ask yourself, is this story one of confinement or liberation? Evelyn didn't become fearless, but she became free. free to question, free to feel, free to change. And it began with a simple act, seeing the invisible wall for what it was, a story that had run its course. And now it's your turn. Take a breath, place your hand over your heart, and whisper what only your soul knows. I am ready. Not for perfection, not for applause, but for truth. Because when you meet the truth with compassion, the walls start to fall, and what's waiting on the other side is you. The storms don't stop. Life doesn't pause for your healing. It doesn't give you a break because you've had enough. Bills still come. Deadlines still whisper. People still disappoint. Some days you wake up, and before you even open your eyes, the weight of everything hits you like a wave crashing into your chest. And in those moments, it's easy to feel small, powerless, drowning. But Evelyn had come to understand something profound. You can't stop the storms, but you can build something inside that stays calm while the wind howls and the world shakes. That something is your inner sanctuary. It's not a place you go. It's a place you become. For most of her life, Evelyn had tried to create safety outside of herself. She tried to find it in the approval of others, in predictable routines, in checking every box that success told her to. She clung to structure and perfection like a life raft. But when the inner world is fragile, even the most perfectly arranged outer life can crumble with one gust of wind. So she started again, not by rearranging her world, but by coming home to herself. Her first lesson came one rainy morning. She had woken up early, heart racing, chest tight, anxiety buzzing under her skin. It wasn't anything specific, just that familiar sense of dread that crept in before the day began. Normally, she would reach for her phone, distract herself with the weather, email, news, anything to not feel it. But that morning, she stayed. She sat up in bed, wrapped herself in a blanket, and simply breathed. In, out, in, out. Her thoughts ran wild. You're wasting time. You'll fall behind. This won't help. But she kept breathing, and after a few minutes, something softened. The tightness eased just a little. Her pulse slowed. Her mind, still busy, began to lose its grip. That's when she realized something. The breath is the doorway, not to escape, but to enter. The breath brings you back, not to the past, not to the future, but to the only place that's real now. And in the now, the storm loses its power. She began studying mindfulness, not as a trend, but as a way of living. She read ancient texts, listened to teachers, and practiced in the quiet corners of her life. Not just on the cushion, but in line at the grocery store. While folding laundry, while sitting in traffic. Mindfulness was not about clearing the mind. It was about opening it. It was about being here even when here was hard. One evening, she sat with her mentor, Eiko, a retired Zen teacher living in a tiny cottage surrounded by lavender fields outside Santa Fe. The woman was in her 70s, with silver hair, a soft laugh, and eyes that held the weight of lifetimes. Evelyn asked her, "How do I stay calm when everything around me feels like chaos?" Eiko smiled gently, then poured tea into 2 small cups. "You build the calm before the chaos," she said. "You don't wait for the storm to come. You plant your roots when the sky is clear." That conversation changed everything. Evelyn had been trying to fight the storm in the middle of it, trying to stay balanced while already falling. But the real strength comes from preparation. From ritual, from showing up to your mind every day the way you'd show up to a sacred space. So she began to build her sanctuary, not with walls or candles or crystals, but with intention. She started every morning with stillness. No phone, no distractions, just breath. 5 minutes at first, then 10. She didn't judge her thoughts, she just noticed them. She let them pass like clouds across the sky. At first, it felt like nothing was happening. But slowly, she began to notice subtle shifts. She reacted less. She paused more. Her nervous system, once on high alert, began to trust that it didn't have to fight all the time. And that's what most people miss. The point of mindfulness isn't to feel good. It's to feel real. It's not to escape pain, but to meet it with open hands. Storm-proofing the mind isn't about becoming numb. It's about becoming rooted. Like a tree with deep roots, it still bends in the wind, but it doesn't break. One morning, after a particularly painful conversation with a family member, Evelyn sat down at her desk and wrote in her journal, "My peace is not dependent on their understanding. My peace lives inside me." She read it aloud, and something in her believed it. That was a turning point. Not because the world suddenly became easier, but because she was no longer waiting for the world to give her peace. She was building it herself. The deeper Evelyn went into her practice, the more she realized that the mind, left untrained, is like a wild horse, strong, fast, beautiful, but dangerous when it's untamed. It runs into fear, gallops through anger, and pulls you into past regrets and future worries like they're real, solid things. But with presence, the mind doesn't need to be silenced. It only needs to be guided. And she started learning to guide hers. Whenever anxiety rose up, she would say softly, "This is not me. This is a moment." When anger burst through, she'd breathe, feel it in her body, and say, "You're allowed to exist, but you don't get to drive the car today." When sadness lingered, she'd ask it, "What are you here to show me?" This was her sanctuary, not escape, but relationship, not control, but connection. She wasn't afraid of her thoughts anymore. She was in conversation with them. That winter, Evelyn took a solo trip to Big Sur. She stayed in a small cabin overlooking the cliffs and the endless, restless ocean. Each morning, she'd sit outside with a blanket wrapped around her legs and watch the waves crash against the rocks. She began to see something beautiful. The waves never stopped, but the rocks never broke. She whispered to herself one morning, "Be like the rock. Let the storm be the storm. Let the wind scream. Let the water rise, but do not be moved." That image stayed with her long after she returned. Whenever life sent its chaos, news of layoffs, relationship stress, and unexpected health scare, she came back to that inner rock, to stillness, to breath, to the truth that peace is not the absence of noise, but the ability to stand in the middle of it without losing yourself. She began creating small rituals in her day that served as anchors. A 5-minute body scan after lunch, lighting a candle each evening and whispering a word of gratitude, placing her hand over her heart before sleep and saying, "I am safe, I am loved, I am home." These weren't grand gestures. They weren't about performance. They were about frequency, reminding her nervous system that peace was her natural state, not a luxury. She learned to listen to the weather inside. Some days felt cloudy, others electric with emotion. Sometimes there were quiet, blue-sky mornings in her mind, and other times thunderstorms of self-doubt. But through it all, she became the observer. That's the magic of a trained mind, not that it stops creating noise, but that you stop mistaking the noise for reality. One evening, Evelyn sat with a group of women at a retreat she had been invited to speak at. The topic: resilience through presence. She stood in front of the room, the crackling fire behind her, and asked them one question: "Where do you go when life hurts?" Some said they go numb. Some said they run. Some said they overthink, overeat, overwork. And she nodded. She had done all those things too. Then she said, "What if instead of going outward, we went inward? What if instead of trying to escape pain, we sat beside it like a friend and asked, 'What do you need me to hear?'" The room was still. Then she shared her practice, not as a formula, but as a way of life. She spoke of breath as a compass, of silence as a teacher, of the small, quiet moments that build strength the way drops of water carve stone. She said, "You don't have to become someone else to be resilient. You just have to remember who you were before fear became your compass." That night, one of the women, Camille, approached her in tears. She said, "I've spent years building walls to keep the pain out, but now I see I was also keeping myself in. Thank you for reminding me that my body is not a battleground. It can be a sanctuary, too." And Evelyn smiled because that was her truth, too. The more she trained her mind, the more she discovered that the real sanctuary isn't silence or control. It's kindness. It's the way you speak to yourself when no one is listening. It's the way you hold your own hand when everything falls apart. It's the way you stay even when you want to run. It's the way you say, "I'm here," to yourself over and over again. And so she returned home, not to a city or a job, but to herself. With every breath, every pause, every sacred moment of attention, she laid another stone in the sanctuary of her soul. And it is from this place, not perfection, that she began to truly live. They say you don't attract what you want. You attract what you are. And that's both terrifying and liberating. Because if you're constantly surrounded by betrayal, by judgment, by chaos, it might not be the world doing it to you. It might be your own wounds calling it in. Evelyn learned this the hard way. After all the growth she had experienced, after learning to breathe through the storms, after discovering her sanctuary, she thought she had healed. She believed she had left behind the old patterns. But healing isn't always linear. It circles back. Sometimes healing shows up as a test. Are you really done with this lesson? It started with someone new. His name was Marcus. He was charming, magnetic, emotionally intelligent. The kind of man who listened well and made you feel like you were the only person in the room. Their connection was fast, intense, almost too perfect. But within weeks, the signs began to show. He would disappear emotionally, then flood her with affection. He'd say all the right things but avoid real intimacy. He mirrored her light but not her truth, and Evelyn found herself shrinking again, questioning herself, feeling like she was too much whenever she asked for clarity, too emotional when she expressed hurt, too sensitive when she set a boundary. One night, after another emotionally exhausting conversation, she sat in her car in a grocery store parking lot, gripping the steering wheel, tears in her eyes. "Why does this keep happening?" she whispered. And in that moment, something in her cracked, not from pain, but from clarity. This wasn't about Marcus, it was about a mirror. She saw it now, how she kept returning to people who mirrored her unhealed story. If I work hard enough, I'll finally be loved. If I'm perfect, they won't leave. If I don't need too much, I'll be safe. She wasn't addicted to the people. She was addicted to the pattern, and that's the mirror effect. We repeat the pain we don't heal until we see it, not to punish ourselves, but because the soul seeks completion. The inner child doesn't want revenge. She wants to rewrite the ending. So Evelyn didn't blame Marcus. She blessed him for showing her the bruise that still hadn't healed. The old wound that said love must be earned, that safety is conditional, that her needs are a burden. She started to look at her patterns not with shame, but with curiosity. She asked, "What am I trying to prove every time I say yes when I mean no? What part of me believes chaos is normal? Whose voice am I still trying to impress in my own head?" It was uncomfortable. It was raw, but it was real. And in that realness, she found the truth. You can't break a pattern you're still romanticizing. She stopped calling it love when it was actually survival. She stopped calling it chemistry when it was actually trauma recognition. She stopped calling it destiny when it was actually repetition. And slowly, the mirrors began to change, because Evelyn was changing. She started choosing differently, not perfectly, but consciously. She began spending time with people who felt like peace, not adrenaline. People who didn't trigger her to perform, but invited her to rest. Friends who didn't need her to explain her worth, who didn't flinch at her silence, who didn't punish her boundaries. And most importantly, she began choosing herself. Not in the loud, aggressive, defiant way that's celebrated on social media, but in the quiet, unshakable way that says, I will not abandon myself ever again, even if it costs me approval, even if it disappoints others, even if I have to walk alone for a while. Because sometimes healing looks like standing in front of the same mirror that once reflected pain and seeing power instead. The hardest part about breaking a pattern isn't seeing it. It's letting go of the identity that came with it. For so long, Evelyn's worth had been tied to being needed, being the strong one, the one who always held it together. She'd earned love by being useful, by overfunctioning, by being fine even when she was breaking. She wore resilience like armor, but inside, her spirit was exhausted. So when she started walking away from the old mirrors, from the chaos, the caretaking, the over-explaining, she wasn't just losing people. She was losing pieces of who she thought she had to be. And grief came, not for a person, but for an identity. She grieved the girl who never got to be soft, who learned to hustle for love, who made herself smaller to fit inside someone else's comfort zone, who thought she had to earn rest. She wrote that girl a letter. Thank you for surviving the way you did, for keeping me safe when I didn't know how. But I don't need to prove myself anymore. I'm not here to be enough for others. I'm here to be whole for me. And in releasing that version of herself, she created space for someone new to emerge. Not someone who never feels pain, but someone who doesn't fear it anymore. Because that's the shift. You stop asking, why is this happening to me? And start asking, what is this here to teach me? And in that moment, the world becomes less like a battlefield and more like a classroom. Not because it gets easier, but because you get wiser. Evelyn began to see the mirrors everywhere, not just in relationships, but in everyday life. When she got irritated by someone's arrogance, she asked, where am I still trying to prove something? When she felt invisible in a conversation, she asked, where am I not speaking up for myself? When she felt drained after saying yes, she asked, why am I betraying my own boundaries? The outer world was no longer just happening. It was reflecting, and with that awareness, life became less random, more intentional. She no longer feared being triggered. She welcomed it, not because it was pleasant, but because it was precise. Every trigger pointed to something inside that needed healing. And every time she stayed, breathed, and listened instead of reacting, she rewrote a small part of her story. Her life was no longer ruled by ghosts. She created a practice she called mirror moments, just 10 minutes each evening where she asked herself 3 questions. What did I feel today that surprised me? Where did I shrink myself today and why? What would I do differently tomorrow if I truly loved myself? Those moments became sacred, not because they were perfect, but because they were honest, and in that honesty she found freedom. She learned that self-awareness without self-compassion is just self-judgment. So she chose both truth and tenderness. She told herself the hard things, and she forgave herself for needing time. One night, as she walked along the quiet shore in Mendocino, the moon full above the waves, she paused and whispered into the wind, I am no longer afraid of my reflection. And she meant it, because mirrors don't just show what's wrong. They also reveal what's possible. And Evelyn had finally seen herself, not through the lens of pain, but through the eyes of love. Not the love she had chased, but the love she had become. There is a voice inside you. You hear it every day, before your feet even touch the floor. It speaks to you when you stand in front of a mirror, when you try something new, when you fail, when you win, when you're alone with your thoughts. It whispers, it judges, it remembers. Sometimes it sounds like your mother, or a teacher, or that one person who broke you down and never built you back up. Other times it sounds like you, but harsher, colder, more tired than you ever remember choosing to be. For Evelyn, that voice had always been there. You're too sensitive, you'll never be enough, you're falling behind, you're hard to love. At first, she didn't question it, she just obeyed it. She worked harder, smiled wider, hid deeper. And the more she listened to that voice, the more it shaped her life. Not because it was true, but because it was repeated. That's what we forget. It's not truth that changes us. It's repetition. And we've been repeating the wrong things for far too long. One afternoon, Evelyn sat in a small cafe in San Diego. It had been a long day of meetings. She was emotionally drained, mentally foggy, and all she wanted was quiet. At the table next to her, a little girl was coloring a picture. She made a mistake, scribbled outside the lines, and immediately frowned. But before she could say anything, her mom leaned in and said gently, "It's okay. You're still learning. And I love how hard you're trying." Evelyn froze. It wasn't her daughter. It wasn't her story. But it was the voice she had needed her entire life. She thought, what if I spoke to myself like that? What would change if I became the mother to my own mind? And that became her mission. Not to control her thoughts, but to change the tone. She started by noticing the old voice, the critic, the harshness. Instead of fighting it, she became curious. Who taught you to speak like that? She asked herself one morning. She traced it back not to one person, but many. A mosaic of pressure, fear, and generational conditioning. She didn't blame them, she understood. They were only passing on what had been given to them, but she made a vow, it ends with me. So she began rewriting the voice. She wrote post-it notes and placed them on her bathroom mirror. You are safe now, you don't have to earn your rest. Your softness is not a flaw, try again, with love. Every time the old voice whispered, she paused and answered back. When it said, you're not doing enough, she said, I'm doing my best, and that is enough. When it said, they're going to leave you, she said, the right people stay. When it said, you're too much, she whispered, I am exactly enough for the life I'm meant to live. It felt awkward at first, like pretending to believe something she didn't feel yet. But she kept going, because Evelyn had learned self-talk isn't about lying to yourself. It's about telling the truth louder than the fear. And with time, the new voice grew stronger, not perfect, not always calm, but kinder. And that changed everything. There is a moment in every healing journey when exhaustion masquerades as failure. When you've done everything right, the journaling, the therapy, the reading, the mindset shifts, and still the ache remains. Evelyn felt this one rainy afternoon as she sat cross-legged on her hardwood floor. The scent of lavender still lingered from her morning diffuser. Her to-do list lay untouched. Her inbox was overflowing, but she couldn't move. Her body didn't want another productivity hack. It didn't want another motivational quote. It wanted silence. It wanted space. So she closed her eyes, and for the first time in weeks, she stopped. No music, no phone, no agenda. Just breath and a quiet question rising from somewhere deep. What would happen if you stopped trying to fix everything? The answer didn't come in words. It came in a feeling, a release, a softening, a sense of being held by something larger than her effort. That's the power of stillness. We live in a world that glorifies the hustle. More goals, more progress, more healing, more doing. But some wounds do not respond to force. Some parts of you do not open until they feel safe. Stillness is safety. Stillness is the space where your nervous system exhales. It's not the absence of action, it's the presence of surrender. And Evelyn began to discover this truth in the most ordinary moments, in the way the sun filtered through her curtains, in the sound of her own breath, in the pause between thoughts. It felt unnatural at first, to not fill the silence with something, to not scroll, to not analyze, to not fix. But slowly the silence became a sanctuary, not a void to escape, but a place to return to. She noticed how her anxiety softened when she took walks without her phone. how her ideas flowed more freely after 10 minutes of silence, how her body felt safer when she gave it permission to rest without earning it. Stillness was no longer boring. It was medicine. There's a wisdom that only appears when you stop grasping. There's a clarity that only comes when the noise fades. And Evelyn began practicing what she called sacred pauses. 3 times a day, she would stop whatever she was doing for 2 minutes. No matter where she was, she'd close her eyes, feel her feet on the ground, and whisper, "I am here, and that is enough." Those moments rewired something in her. She stopped seeing rest as laziness. She stopped seeing slowing down as failure. She began to understand what the wise have always known. Healing is not a race. It is a rhythm, and your soul has its own timing. Stillness allowed Evelyn to hear what her busyness had drowned out, her true needs, her quiet dreams, her forgotten joy. She reconnected with her body, not to control it, but to listen to it. She learned when her tears were saying, "I need release," when her fatigue was saying, "I need gentleness," when her irritation was saying, "I need space." None of these things could be understood through pushing, only through pausing. So if you are tired, not just physically but spiritually, don't rush through it. Don't muscle your way out of it. Be still. Let the ache speak. Let the stillness hold you. This is not a detour. It is the path. Because sometimes the fastest way forward is to be still enough to hear what your soul has been trying to say all along. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are unfolding. Fear is a shape-shifter. It doesn't always look like screaming panic or sweaty palms. Sometimes it looks like perfectionism, or procrastination, or staying in a job that drains you because security, or holding back your truth because peace. Fear is clever. It learns your language. It wears your voice. It whispers things that sound reasonable. Wait until you're more prepared. Don't risk it yet. What if they judge you? And before you know it, you're living a small, quiet version of your life, safe but unsatisfied, secure but stuck. Evelyn knew this loop all too well. There was a chapter of her life when she had everything people told her to want: a steady job, a long-term relationship, a nice apartment. But every morning she woke up with a heaviness, a feeling of, "Is this it?" And she judged herself for it. You should be grateful, she told herself. So many people have less. But the soul doesn't measure life in check boxes. It speaks in truth. And Evelyn's truth was this: she was afraid. Afraid to disrupt the comfort, afraid to disappoint others, afraid to fail, so she stayed, longer than she should have, until one day something broke, not outside, but inside. She sat on a park bench watching people walk by and thought, what would I do if I wasn't afraid? The answer came like lightning: leave, write, start over. And just like that, she had her compass, not a map, not a plan. Just one question: what would I do if I wasn't afraid? That became her practice. Every day she'd ask it, and every day she'd take one small step. She didn't quit her job overnight. She didn't publish a book in a month. She didn't suddenly become fearless, but she started writing again, even just one page. She had honest conversations. She told the truth about her joy. Fear didn't vanish, but it stopped ruling her, because she learned this sacred secret. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is choosing anyway, and you don't need to leap. You just need to lean into the hard conversation, lean into the uncertain path, lean into the truth that keeps tugging at you. Evelyn began tracking her courage wins. She had a small notebook. Every day she wrote one thing she did that felt brave, spoke up in the meeting, said no without apologizing, submitted the article, went to the networking event alone. Those pages became proof, proof that she was more than her fear, proof that she was moving. Fear feeds on silence and secrecy, but when you speak it aloud, you shrink its power. So she started sharing her fears with safe people. Not for advice, just for space. And she realized most people were afraid too, afraid of being too much, afraid of not being enough, afraid of starting, afraid of stopping. But together, in honesty, they found something else, freedom. Because the opposite of fear is not bravery, it's truth. Fear tells you what might go wrong, truth reminds you what could go right. And Evelyn's life began to open, not dramatically, but consistently. More color, more depth, more breath. All because she stopped waiting for the fear to disappear and started moving with it. That is how you break the loop, not by becoming fearless, but by becoming faithful. Faithful to your inner whisper, faithful to the small yes. Faithful to the version of you who's been waiting for permission to begin. So today, ask yourself, what would I do if I wasn't afraid? Then do one small thing, not to impress anyone, not to prove anything, just to remind yourself, you're still alive, and that in itself is a miracle. One step, one breath, one truth at a time. This is how courage is built, not in noise, but in motion. Stillness is your sacred guide. Emotions are like weather, they shift, they swirl. They come unannounced and leave without permission. But for many of us, emotions have become something to fear, not because they are dangerous, but because we never learned how to hold them. Evelyn was no stranger to emotional flooding. There were days when a small trigger, a text left on read, a missed deadline, a painful memory, could spiral into hours of overthinking. She would tell herself to calm down, to be rational, to get over it. But the more she resisted her feelings, the louder they became. It wasn't until she heard a therapist say, "What you feel is never the problem. It's how you treat what you feel," that something clicked. Emotional agility is the ability to feel deeply without being consumed, to honor your emotions without worshiping them, to let the wave move through you without pretending it's not there, and without letting it knock you off your center. And so Evelyn began to reframe her relationship with emotions. The first step, naming them. Instead of saying, "I'm overwhelmed," she got specific. "I'm anxious because I feel out of control. I'm sad because I feel unseen. I'm angry because my boundaries were crossed." Naming brought clarity, clarity brought space. Then she asked herself, what does this emotion need from me? Sometimes it needed movement, a walk, a scream into a pillow, dancing to loud music. Sometimes it needed stillness, a nap, a quiet cry, a long bath. Sometimes it needed expression, writing, talking, creating. But most often it needed compassion, the kind she had always given others but withheld from herself. Evelyn created what she called her emotional first aid kit, not filled with tools to fix the feeling, but to feel it fully. Inside it, she kept a playlist that matched her moods, a journal with prompts like "What is my heart asking for today?" A list of safe people to call, reminders of past storms she had survived. The more she used it, the more she trusted herself to handle any emotion, not because she liked pain, but because she knew pain had something to say. She stopped asking, "How do I get rid of this?" and started asking, "What is this here to teach me?" She saw how grief sharpened her gratitude, how anger pointed to her values, how fear revealed her desire to protect. Each emotion became a messenger, each wave a guide, and Evelyn learned you don't drown by feeling, you drown by suppressing. The emotions you run from don't disappear, they grow in the dark. But when you feel them fully, without judgment, without shame, they lose their grip. You become bigger than the storm, because emotional agility is not about control. It's about presence. It's about staying with yourself even when it's hard. And when you do, something powerful happens. You start to trust yourself again, not because life gets easier, but because you know you can meet yourself in every weather, rain or sun, tears or laughter. You are no longer at the mercy of the sky. You have become the steady ground beneath it. Humans are storytellers by nature. Before we wrote anything down, we spoke our truths into existence. Around fires, at dinner tables, in whispers to ourselves at midnight. But the most powerful stories are not the ones we share with others. They're the ones we tell ourselves, and too often those stories are cruel. I'm not good enough. I'm always the one who gets left. I mess everything up. People don't really care. They're not facts. They're conclusions we've drawn from pain, repetition, and survival. Evelyn had been repeating the same story for years. I have to earn love by being useful. It started in childhood. She learned that when she performed well, she got praise. When she helped others, she was seen. So she became the helper, the achiever, the fixer, even when it cost her peace, even when it drained her spirit. And over time, that story solidified into identity. Until one day she asked herself, what if that story isn't true anymore? What if it never was? That's the first step of rewriting your narrative, realizing you are not the story. You are the storyteller. You are allowed to question it, to challenge it, to change it. Evelyn began by collecting evidence against her old story. She wrote down every moment someone showed up for her, not because she was useful, but because she was loved. She listed the times she rested and was still valued. She recalled the people who stayed even when she had nothing to offer. Bit by bit, the story cracked. Truth started seeping through. Then she asked herself, what story do I want to live in now? She wrote a new one, I am worthy of love because I exist. It felt foreign at first, uncomfortable, like wearing someone else's clothes, but she kept repeating it, in the mirror, in her journal, in her prayers. Slowly, the new story started to feel like home. Not because the old story disappeared, but because she stopped feeding it. We all have origin stories, some filled with beauty, some filled with wounds, but origin is not destiny. You are allowed to update the script. You are allowed to evolve, and your brain will follow. Neuroplasticity is the science that proves this. Your brain can rewire its patterns based on new input, new stories, new beliefs. Every time you speak kindness to yourself, you're carving a new path. Every time you interrupt the old tape, you're breaking a cycle. It won't be instant, but it will be real. So Evelyn started catching herself in the moment. When she thought, I'm too much, she paused and whispered, I'm just enough. When she thought, they'll leave if I show who I really am, she said, the right people stay. These weren't affirmations. They were truth claims, seeds of a new reality. And just like planting anything, it took time, watering, patience. But soon she began to live from the new story, making different choices, speaking with more confidence, setting boundaries without guilt, not because she became someone else, but because she remembered who she was before the world told her who to be. That is the power of self-narrative. Your inner voice is the script your life performs, and when you edit the script, the whole play changes. So today, ask yourself, what story have I been living in, and what story do I want to live into next? Then speak it, write it, practice it, until the voice in your head becomes a friend, and your story becomes a sanctuary. For years, Evelyn confused boundaries with walls. She thought setting a boundary meant closing herself off, pushing people away, or being unkind. She didn't want to hurt anyone's feelings, so she said yes when she wanted to say no. She stayed in conversations long after she felt drained. She listened to problems that weren't hers to fix. And beneath it all was one quiet fear. If I set a boundary, will they still love me? This is a fear many of us carry, especially those of us who grew up being praised for being easygoing, helpful, or selfless. But here's the truth Evelyn had to learn. Boundaries are not a rejection of others. They are a deep act of self-respect. They don't ruin relationships. They reveal which ones are real. The turning point came when Evelyn was overwhelmed, juggling too many commitments, and someone asked her for a favor. Every part of her wanted to say no. But the old story kicked in. If you say no, they'll think you're selfish. She paused, took a breath, and then said gently, "I can't take that on right now, but I hope it works out well for you." The world didn't end. They didn't hate her. And something new began, peace. From there, Evelyn began to see boundaries not as barriers, but as bridges. Bridges between her truth and her relationships. She realized that when she didn't speak her needs, resentment built up silently. And resentment is a slow poison. Boundaries, spoken kindly and clearly, are how love stays clean. So she started practicing boundary language. Simple phrases like, "I'm not available for that, but thank you for thinking of me." "That doesn't work for me. Let me get back to you on that." Not every boundary was well received. Some people resisted. Some relationships changed. But Evelyn stayed rooted because she wasn't doing it to control others. She was doing it to come home to herself. And as she honored her space, something magical happened. The right people leaned in. They respected her no. They trusted her yes, because real love doesn't require self-abandonment. Real connection thrives in clarity. Boundaries are the instructions we give others on how to love us well. They don't make you selfish. They make you honest. And honesty is the foundation of all things sacred. So if you struggle with boundaries, start small. One no at a time. One moment of pause before you agree. One breath before you answer. And ask yourself, is this a yes from my soul or a yes from my fear? Then choose from love. Love for yourself. Love for your time. Love for the kind of peace that can only grow when you make room for it. Boundaries are not the end of love. They are the beginning of it. When life shakes you, what steadies you? When plans collapse and people disappoint, when fear grips your lungs and the world feels like too much, where do you go inside yourself? For Evelyn, that question became everything. Because no matter how much progress she made, storms still came. And for a while, she thought growth meant avoiding the storm. But wisdom taught her otherwise. You don't become powerful by avoiding pain. You become powerful by standing in it and staying soft. The warrior mind isn't about force. It's not about control, it's about presence. To be here, in this moment, with your breath, with your body, with your truth. Evelyn learned this the hard way. In a season where everything unraveled, a job loss, a betrayal, a health scare, she had to choose, crumble or root deeper. She chose to stand. Not because she felt strong, but because she remembered stillness is a form of resistance. And breathing is an act of faith. She began to train her mind like a warrior trains their body, not by fighting, but by disciplining, by returning, again and again. To now, she practiced meditation even when her mind screamed. Cold showers to learn how to breathe through discomfort. Walking slowly when everything inside wanted to rush. Saying no to reactivity, yes to clarity, each act small but sacred. Each one a reminder you are not your panic. You are not your chaos, you are the one who sees it. This is the essence of the warrior mind, emotional discipline without emotional suppression. To feel the fear and keep choosing courage. To feel the doubt and keep showing up. To feel the grief and keep loving. She stopped looking for motivation. She trained consistency. She stopped chasing outcomes. She anchored in process. Some mornings she wanted to disappear, but she made her bed. Some nights anxiety sat beside her like an old enemy, but she welcomed it like an old teacher. She whispered, "I see you. You don't own me anymore." That is power, not loud, not dramatic, but steady. And the more she trained that presence, the more the storms lost their grip. Not because they were weaker, but because she was no longer afraid of them. The warrior mind is not about never falling. It's about knowing how to rise. Not in spite of the wound, but because of it. And Evelyn learned the strongest people are not those who fight the hardest. They are the ones who return to peace the quickest. They breathe, they bow, they rise, they remember who they are. Even when the world tries to make them forget. It began with a simple question. What am I not seeing? That question echoed through Evelyn's life in 1,000 quiet moments, in conversations that triggered her, in habits she couldn't break, in reactions that seemed out of proportion. Awareness, she realized, isn't just about noticing what's around you. It's about witnessing what's within you. The stories, the shadows, the subtle choices made on autopilot, and the awareness of how those choices shape reality. Most people live asleep, not because they want to, but because they never learned how to stay awake. Evelyn used to think she was self-aware because she was introspective, but introspection without compassion becomes self-judgment. And true awareness isn't harsh, it's illuminating. It doesn't say you're broken, it says, look at this pattern, you still need it. So she began a practice. Every time she reacted strongly, she paused and asked, what part of me feels threatened? Every time she made an assumption, she asked, is this true or just familiar? Every time she found herself slipping into an old habit, she asked, what need am I trying to meet? These weren't easy questions, but they opened hidden doors. She started to see how often she operated from fear disguised as logic. How often she chose people who confirmed her worst beliefs about herself. How often she made herself small to avoid the discomfort of being seen. And with awareness came something she never expected, choice. Because once you see it, you can shift it, not instantly, but consciously. She realized she didn't have to act from every feeling. She didn't have to believe every thought. She didn't have to follow every story to its end. She could pause, she could breathe, she could choose again. That is the quiet power of awareness. It doesn't fix everything, but it changes everything. Because when you become the watcher of your experience, you create space. And in that space, new paths emerge, no longer ruled by triggers, no longer trapped in loops, no longer exiled from your own wisdom. Awareness is not a destination, it is a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it grows. So Evelyn kept practicing. She didn't try to be perfect. She just tried to be present, and over time she noticed. The same situations stopped stealing her peace. The same people stopped shaking her ground because she was no longer reacting. She was responding with choice, with clarity, with consciousness. And that, she discovered, is freedom. Not a life without problems, but a mind no longer imprisoned by them. There is a quiet season that arrives after healing, a moment when the chaos softens, the grief loosens, and for the first time in a long time, you're not just surviving. You're standing, breathing, and asking the question, now what? For Evelyn, this moment came unexpectedly, not with a celebration, but in the stillness of a Tuesday morning, coffee in hand, sunlight on her face. A calm so unfamiliar she didn't know what to do with it. She had spent years repairing, unraveling old stories, healing traumas, building boundaries, but no one had taught her how to thrive. Thriving, she discovered, isn't just about adding more. It's about choosing better. It's not about the hustle. It's about alignment, not about perfection, but presence. So she began asking herself different questions. What makes me feel most alive? What kind of life would feel like mine, not borrowed or expected, but mine? What am I ready to stop settling for? These were not easy questions. They poked at complacency, at fear of taking up space. But they also unlocked a fire. Thriving begins with permission. Permission to want more than the absence of pain. Permission to dream again, to laugh again, to love again, fully, wildly, without apology. So Evelyn started slow. She bought flowers every Friday just because. She let herself explore hobbies with no purpose other than joy. She reconnected with creativity, with nature, with friendships that made her soul breathe. She stopped performing healing and started living it. She made a list one morning, things that make me feel like me. It included long walks without a destination, books that make her cry, saying no without guilt, dancing barefoot in her kitchen, holding silence without fear. loving without conditions. None of it was grand. All of it was real. That's the truth about thriving. It looks quieter than the world tells you. It's not always about climbing. Sometimes it's about rooting deep into your values, your truth, your joy. She learned to ask before every decision, is this building the life I want to live? And if not, she had the courage to course correct. Thriving isn't linear. Some days she slipped into survival mode again. That was okay. The difference now was awareness and choice. She was no longer running from life. She was curating it. She didn't need everything to be perfect. She needed it to be hers. And as she built that life brick by brick, ritual by ritual, her energy changed. People noticed. Opportunities flowed, not because she chased them, but because she became magnetic. You don't attract what you want, you attract what you are, and Evelyn was becoming someone who felt like home. This is the gift on the other side of healing. A life that belongs to you, not your trauma, not your past, not your fear, just you. Thriving isn't a destination, it's a devotion, a daily choosing to be here, to be whole. To be alive in every sense of the word, becoming is not a one-time event. It is not a single breakthrough or a sudden awakening. It is the quiet, sacred repetition of choosing yourself, even when no one is watching. For Evelyn, the final chapter of her transformation was not a finish line. It was an arrival. Into her body, into her truth, into the self she spent years preparing to meet. She no longer asked, when will I be healed? She asked, how will I live now that I am aware? Because that's what the journey had always been about. Not becoming someone else, but coming home to herself. Becoming is a practice of remembering, of honoring, of aligning. It's making the bed even when you're tired because it tells your mind, I care about this space. It's keeping your word to yourself because it teaches your nervous system, I am safe with me. It's walking away from drama even when your ego wants to engage because it says, I am done rehearsing pain. There will still be temptations. Old patterns will still whisper, but Evelyn no longer mistook their volume for truth. She had built enough self-trust to pause, to choose again, to respond, not react. That is the evidence of healing, not perfection, but power. The power to return, the power to reset, the power to live in integrity. She carried with her the lessons that presence is more powerful than performance. That softness is not weakness, but wisdom. That boundaries are a form of love. That joy is not frivolous, but essential. And most of all, that every version of her, the broken, the brave, the becoming, deserved to be held with compassion. So she lived that way, not loud, not for show, but as devotion to breath, to balance, to beauty in the small things. She no longer needed to prove her worth. She simply lived it, and that changed everything. This is the practice of becoming, to rise every day with the intention to honor your truth, to meet your shadows with tenderness, to greet your gifts with humility. It is not about becoming someone new. It is about being someone real, someone steady, someone kind, someone awake. And in that practice, Evelyn discovered what we all seek. Not the life others told her to chase, but the life her soul had always known. She didn't need more answers, she needed deeper presence, and from that place she lived, not perfectly, but powerfully. This is not the end. This is the invitation to become who you already are, to live as if your healing matters, because it does. You do. A life transformed, Evelyn's journey and the universal call to rise. When we first met Evelyn, she was not a symbol of strength. She was a mirror of our most human moments, uncertain, bruised by life, aching for answers. Her story wasn't dramatic in the cinematic sense, but it was real. Real in the way we wake up tired of pretending. Real in the quiet ache of wanting more while fearing we might not deserve it. Real in the cycles we get stuck in, where fear poses as wisdom and numbness masquerades as peace. Evelyn's journey was never about becoming extraordinary. It was about remembering what's already inside: resilience, awareness, compassion, and the gentle power of choice. She began in survival mode like many of us do. She woke up each day to noise, both around her and inside her. Expectations, regrets, the haunting echoes of past failures and future fears. Life was a checklist. She was constantly reacting. The mind never stopped. And beneath it all, a quiet voice whispered, "Is this all there is?" But even in her chaos, she noticed something. Moments, fleeting but potent, a breath that felt grounding, a walk that eased the anxiety, a conversation that cracked open truth. Those moments became threads, and she began to follow them. From there, Evelyn learned about the mind, not in theory but in lived experience. She discovered that thoughts weren't facts, that not every emotion was an emergency, that silence wasn't empty but fertile. She learned about her inner world, the 8 consciousnesses that shaped her reality, the loops of reaction driven by unconscious seeds, those seeds the Buddhists call bija, buried in the deep storehouse mind. And with that awareness, she began to weed the garden, not through force, but through seeing how anger rose from wounded expectations, how sadness often masked shame, how her habits weren't flaws but outdated strategies for survival. She forgave herself for not knowing. She grieved the years spent asleep, but she didn't drown in the past. She used it as compost to grow something new. Along the way, Evelyn practiced presence, not perfectly, but persistently. She meditated not to become enlightened, but to remember who she was beneath the noise. She learned to name her emotions without becoming them. She asked better questions. What am I feeling? What does this part of me need? What truth am I avoiding? The practice was raw, at times lonely, healing often is, but slowly she shifted. She trained her mind like a warrior, breathing through discomfort, grounding during panic, returning to the present 1,000 times. She built boundaries, not walls, but bridges, boundaries that honored her time, energy, and truth. That said, I love you and I love me too. And when the storms came, and they did, she no longer broke. She bent. She stayed rooted. She responded with grace, not because she felt no fear, but because she had practiced steadiness. She moved from survival to stability, then from stability to alignment. And then, the most daring move of all, she chose joy. Not performative joy, but embodied joy. Joy that came from living a life that felt like hers. She stopped apologizing for her sensitivity. She stopped shrinking to fit. She stopped performing healing and started living it. Her journey wasn't linear. It was a spiral. Each loop brought her deeper into truth. Each lesson revisited with new eyes, and in the final chapters, Evelyn began to thrive. Not by having it all together, but by being together with it all. She practiced becoming not someone else, but the most honest version of herself. She made peace with the shadows, she honored her light, and most importantly, she lived fully, gently, powerfully, the deeper lesson. What Evelyn teaches us all. Evelyn's story is not just hers. It is yours, it is mine. It is the universal path of awakening. The lesson isn't that life gets easier, it's that you get wiser, more present, more capable of riding the waves without becoming the storm. The mind, left untrained, is a master of suffering, but trained with patience, it becomes a servant of peace. We learn to unhook from the narratives that keep us small, to breathe through discomfort instead of running, to sit with fear and listen, to ask what our emotions are trying to teach us. We learn to live less from habit and more from intention. We begin to notice the simple power of pause. Because in the pause, everything is possible. You do not need to be fixed. You need to be met with awareness, with compassion, and with the willingness to choose again. That's the work. That's the path. This work is not glamorous, but it is holy. And it is available to all of us. So now, dear listener, dear reader, what about you? Where are you in your journey? Which part of Evelyn's path resonated with your story? What practice, what truth, what shift are you ready to begin today? Let's open this space for conversation. Comment below with your thoughts, your reflections, or even your questions. Let's learn from each other. Your voice may be exactly what someone else needs to hear. And if this journey moved you, if Evelyn's transformation awakened something inside you, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us create more content that heals, inspires, and reminds us all of who we truly are. See you in the next story. See you in the next becoming.